Hi everyone, we hope you are doing well. As to provide a space of entertainment and learning, during the following minutes we will first explain the origins of international relations from a different perspective of the mainstream approach, and then we will move to the Amarna Letters. The goal of our video is to prove the existence of international relations prior to the Peace of Westphalia by analyzing the beginning and the evolution of the Amarna Letters, which represented one of the earliest examples of international diplomacy. Despite more than a century of intensive discussion about the nature of the international system, it is difficult to deny how underdeveloped the concept continues to be. Many of the existing disciplines fail to provide an accurate perspective of the history of international relations and its origins. For instance, Eurocentrism or presentism, among other fields of study. Moreover, many of these views are attached to the Westphalian narrative, which certainly implies an Eurocentric bias. However, it is important to remark that during the past few decades, a rising number of scholars have disclaimed the notion that international relations emerge with the formation of states and the birth of sovereignty. At the same time, they have rejected the fundamentals of the assertion about the centrality of the Peace of Westphalia to the evolution and structure of international society. Additionally, certain academics, as well as approaches, have acknowledged that the study of international relations has historically centered from Western perspectives and experiences, excluding the voices of people from other regions of the world. For instance, Edward Said's Orientalism claimed that the Orient is represented through Western lenses and emphasized the idea of escaping from Eurocentrism. In order to prove our point, we will focus on the Amarna Letters, which show that the origins of international diplomacy are not recent. Instead, they can be traced back to much earlier. These letters are one of the earliest examples of diplomacy that arose during the 14th century. In the following minutes, we will be referring to its language and writing system, the role of the messenger, the great kings, among other topics.
In this case, we are moving away from the diplomacy we now know and going back to a few centuries ago to ask ourselves about the diplomatic forms that were used in the Eastern Mediterranean during the mid-14th century before the Common Era. The Amarna Letters are a huge quantity of clay tablets containing the correspondence between Egypt and the states of the Eastern Mediterranean and Mesopotamia around the reign of Akhenaten. This correspondence was found at the site of Akhenaten in 1887, a short-lived city discovered by Akhenaten, among whose buildings an archive with all the international correspondence was found. Its content can be split into two parts. On the one hand, the relation between Egypt and the other major powers in the Near East, and on the other hand, the communication among Egypt and their vassals. They were mainly focused on negotiations of diplomatic marriage, issues on friendship and on major powers such as the Great Kings, and exchange of gifts and materials like the Egyptian gold. When it comes to the language and writing system, these letters are written in Akkadian in cuneiform script. The cuneiform was made by incisions in the clay tablets with the wedge forming pictograms, signs that represented objects or ideas in a more or less real way. This is one of the first writing systems of humanity, and at this period of time, Akkadian was the lingua franca of the Near East. Moving forward to the Great Kings, we can say that the monarchs and the diplomatic corps understood that there was a differentiation between Great Kings and Lesser Kings. The Great Kings, commonly accepted as such in the Amarna Letters, were the King of Egypt, the King of Hatti, the King of Mitanni, the King of Karduniash, and the King of Assyria. These were the most powerful, influential, and prosperous territories at that time. Moreover, according to Mario Liverani, one of the most prominent historians and issues of the ancient East, in the Amarna Letters there is given what he has come to call ideology of brotherhood. These great kings are cited as brothers to each other and reiterate in a multitude of letters the idea of not causing harm, of treating the opposite well, and of loving each other by sharing resources and even gods. This next letter shows us how the kings address to each other. So moving on, it is also overriding to talk about the key importance of the messenger, without which we cannot understand these relations. The messenger was both the person who carried the letter, the ambassador who acted as a diplomat, and sometimes the hostage or the entertained guest. This messenger had to be someone close to the king, of importance and prestige within the court. Be that as it may, the messengers were treated according to the rules of hospitality. Aside from their prestige and lineage, why were these messengers important, and what were their royal functions? In a world of scribes where they were the ones who read and wrote, it was necessary the presence of someone who not only would read the letter, but also, in order to avoid problems derived from misinterpretation of languages or forms, someone that would expose the matter to deal with their words, and that was fully able to act on behalf of its king in dialogue or discuss the solution. As to provide some examples, PDC and Tulubri were a pair of messengers of the Amarna Letters correspondence. They were the messengers of King Tushratta of Mitanni, and are referenced in Amarna Letters EA27, 28, and EA29. These next two letters are parts of the letter 28 called Messengers Detained and a Protest, in which it appears the role of the messenger.
Egyptian gold was the main grievance found in the Amarna Letters. The Asiatic kings commonly asked for gold, as they believed Egypt had plenty of this. Even so, although Egypt and Mitanni had been enemies during the Egyptian early 18th dynasty, fighting for territories in Syria, during the reign of Amenhotep II, they established good relations through a diplomatic marriage. Hence, Egyptian and Mitanni rulers usually exchanged letters and gifts. As Mario Liverani very clearly stresses out, gifts should not be asked for, but given. They should be accepted and appreciated, and they should be reciprocated. The following letter deals with the Egyptian gold. This letter was sent from the king of Babylonia to the king of Egypt. To continue, we would like to show an example of a letter that deals with the marriage diplomacy and the role of the women, sent by the king of Babylonia to the king of Egypt. Throughout these years, after the emergence of the Amarna Letters, other forms of interactions arose and became part of what constitutes international relations prior to the Peace of Westphalia. When it comes to this event, there are a few things that need to be highlighted. The Treaty of Westphalia marked a new way of understanding international relations. Therefore, it can be denied the importance of this event and how it has shaped this discipline. Nevertheless, it is essential to acknowledge that international relations started much earlier, as it is in the case of the Amarna Letters, that represent one of the first examples of diplomacy. More concretely, the letters are the culmination of a tradition developed over centuries, through which the states might communicate with one another in a common language, and resolve their differences by reference to common standards and conventions. Although some practices and the tone used are curious to us, the Amarna Letters shows us an international situation that does not differ too much from the current one, with clearly established superpowers in conflict for the control of smaller states or with the intent of maintaining the status quo, as well as a diplomatic language full of established formulas and a series of dirty practices or recurring requests that make trade, cultural exchange, and religious influences flourish. Accordingly, the diplomacy of the Amarna Letters determines the wide scope of international relations that was established between the great kings and its empires at that time, before the Peace of Westphalia in 1648.
Thank you so much for stopping by and watching our video. We hope that you learned something, and if you did, please subscribe to our channel. Thank you again for watching. Take care and stay safe.